Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Therapeutic Thursday with me, John Quick, a fellow aortic dissection survivor of coming up nearly 19 years. So, just to summarize that, in 2006, I had a type A dissection, had a mechanical aortic valve fitted. Then I developed a type B dissection, which has been defensively managed with medication ever since. And as a result of that life-changing experience, which I don't really need to tell you how life-changing it is, I started reworking my life somewhat. I'd always been very interested in psychology, started doing courses, gaining qualifications, starting to work volunteering with organizations, and that's led me into this field. I'm delighted to say that today we're welcoming another guest, of course, Grace Barnhart. So, a quick hello to Grace before I start the rest of the show. Hi there, Grace.
Hi, John. How are you?
Very nice to have you with us. And what we're going to set up today is we're taking a slightly different slant today, in that we're going to go into a little bit more about Marfan syndrome. So after my own experience coming around in the hospital, I remember them telling me that I had indications of Marfan syndrome. I'd always been very skinny, quite tall, could never put on weight, had the concave chest, and so that started to make sense to me. As many of you know, it's also hereditary, so that, as a father as well, that's had various knock-on issues for me about my children. And that's where we come to Grace, who is going to tell us much more about Marfan than I actually know, but is herself a Marfan diagnosed sufferer. That's right, isn't it, Grace?
Yeah, so Marfan syndrome is a genetic connective tissue disorder that greatly impacts the aorta. And it really impacts everything from your joints, your skin, bones, eyes, aorta, really anything it can impact. And people with Marfan syndrome connecting it to aortic hope are 250 times more likely to have an aortic dissection than the general population. Um, and 50%, there's a 50% chance of passing it on to a child. So my dad has it, and then it was passed on to me through my father. And Marfan syndrome is it lasts your whole life. So you're born with Marfan syndrome and you have it your whole life. There's no cure for it. There are ways that you can treat it in different ways, whether that be through medication or surgeries or things like that, but there's no exact cure at the moment. Um, but yeah, no, so it definitely impacts your life in all sorts of different ways. I am about 5'10", which is, pretty tall, but not super, super tall, but definitely I got some of that Marfan syndrome side effect of being tall and having the long arms and the long legs. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And when did you first become aware that you were a Marfan sufferer? When did that sort of first become part of your consciousness and your way of living?
Yeah,
And
so I was
even then,
diagnosed.
I'm interested also therapeutically in the way that began to influence your life as a child in terms of what you needed to be careful about, etc., etc.
Yeah, for sure. So I was diagnosed when I was 4 years old. And I was actually diagnosed because there was a problem with my eye. And that's actually a really big indication for a lot of people who are diagnosed with Marfan's. A lot of people are diagnosed through their eyes. So I was diagnosed at 4 years old. We knew that it was a possibility because, again, my dad has Marfan's and he had been diagnosed when he was a child. So we knew that there was a chance. And I went and I got diagnosed from the doctor. Dr.
So what
He
was
said,
going on with your eye then?
so I had a dislocated lens. So my parents realized that when I would point at things, like in our area, we get a lot of like deer and foxes and things like that. And my parents would notice that when I would point to the deer or point to the foxes or whatever, I was pointing at them where they weren't. So I was like a
Hmm.
couple feet off. So everybody thought I had a lazy eye. The doctors were like, oh, she has a lazy eye. And my parents were like, that just doesn't seem right. Like, we don't think she has a lazy eye. And they took me in, and it turns out that I had a slightly dislocated lens, but it was able to be fixed through or managed through glasses until
Right.
I was, later down the road, they ended up taking them out, which we can dig into a little bit later. But again, I was diagnosed at 4 years old, so I don't really remember that exactly. But growing up, Marfan syndrome, you're not supposed to play contact sports or anything of that nature. So basketball, football, volleyball, any of those things because of the risks of aortic issues or getting hit in the head with a ball and your retina tears and all sorts of other issues that can come from that.
So
So
straight away there we can see that, the innocence, the freedom of childhood is being affected. And did
for
that
sure.
begin to like kind of create issues for you as a kid? Were they like saying to mum and dad, why can't I do this, or feeling cross
Well,
about it? Or
it's interesting. I actually grew up being a cheerleader and a swimmer, and I did both of those for a very long time. I think what really impacted me as a kid was going to public school and going to gym class, right? Because you go to gym class and everybody's there, and it's usually two classes put together, at least where I went to school. So you have about, anywhere from 50 to 60 kids in a gym class. Um, and I was the kid that wasn't allowed to do the push-up test, the running tests, things of that nature because of the strain it put on my body. But I would still go to class. It was just certain, you know, I guess certain topics in gym class I would have to sit out on. And as a kid, you know, a lot of kids aren't the nicest when you're growing up. So it was a lot
yeah,
of kids coming up to me and being like, why are you sitting out? Oh, you're being lazy, or oh, you're faking it because I don't look sick.
sure.
So it was very hard for me to kind of express that to other kids because again, I was so young, right? Elementary school, especially, it's how do you describe it to these kids, right? Um, so I would say that as a kid, especially in elementary school, really from the ages of, you know, 5 or 6, give or take, till 11 or 12, sitting out during gym class can be, the spotlight is on you, right? And kids are
Mm.
curious and they want to know. So I think that that definitely impacted me because I was always like the outlier. I was always sitting out. I was always different than the other kids in my grade. Again, I was always very tall. I always had glasses that I had to wear. So it definitely put a lot of spotlight on me that I didn't necessarily want growing up.
And And did teachers have to be educated about this? Like a gym teacher, they're not always, they don't have a reputation for always being the most empathic of the teachers.
Yes. I got very, very lucky. My gym teacher was absolutely amazing. And I never wanted to feel like I was sitting out. I never wanted to feel like the outlier. Um, so a lot of times it would be like, my gym teacher would let me be the one, the student who's pacing the kids, right? They're doing the back and the forth. Here, Grace, you click the button or write down their number or whatever. So I was always doing something,
Mm,
as opposed to me just sitting down on the floor. Um, and yes, there was definitely a degree in which we wanted any teacher really that I was at school with, to be somewhat aware of Marfan syndrome, right? We understand that it's a rare condition. You're not going to have a lot of kids with this, but you do have a kid with this. And we wanted them to be aware of what my body could go through or whatever else the case might be. And especially at the clinic at school is a whole nother ball game, right? Um, if I have a headache, it might not just be a simple headache. Or,
sure.
if I'm having chest pain, I might not just be stressed, right? So there was, my parents were really good about helping me advocate for myself, but also being big cheerleaders for me and helping me advocate. And, we would usually give teachers like a plan and kind of a brief rundown of Marfan syndrome, what to do if this happens, or what to do if this happens, who to contact, things like that, just so they could be a little bit informed about Marfan syndrome and my story specifically.
Nevertheless, I could imagine it could set up a situation in a young life where you've used the word already, outlier.
Yes,
You can
yes.
start to feel different. Do you feel that you've kind of carried that sense with you into adolescence and now into young adulthood?
I think in a way, yes, I definitely have. I think that when I go out and there's certain things going on, I've always been very good about knowing how my body, can handle certain things or what I just don't want to test, right? when I don't want to necessarily, hope for the best. But I also, especially with my dad's, medical stuff, and I was a young kid when my dad was going through a lot of big Marfan related issues. I think it definitely impacted the way that I have relationships with people, right? How I attach to people, how I think it just, and especially like the whole outlier thing, right? Again, I've always been really tall. And, a lot of women are like, oh, I want to be tall. And then you're like the tallest one in the room, and you don't maybe always want to be the tallest one in the room. But I think um, over the years growing up, that I've kind of taken that and used it to empower myself.
Hmm.
But I definitely, I mean, high school, I felt like an outlier. I mentioned earlier that I did cheer for a really long time as a kid. And when I got to high school, I had to stop. And that was really tough on me because I saw a lot of my friends continue to do cheer and I had to back away. So I had to cheer them on from the sidelines, right? So I think that in a way, there's always been a little bit of outlier that I still
Okay.
carry with me, but it's definitely become a little bit more learning how to empower myself and my community through it.
Right. And you mentioned there kind of the impact on sort of relationships because perhaps of what's happened to your father. Is it kind of, do you feel that you carried that kind of trauma? Because I know that he's been through an awful lot.
With relationships, there's a big aspect of I've always felt like a caregiver. When I was younger, when I was 7 years old, my dad had some very, very, very scary moments with Marfan syndrome. And my mom was also pregnant with my little brother. So I think, especially with my little brother, even now, 14 years later, I definitely have more of a, in my mind, I still see him as a little boy I need to help take care of because, as my mom and I put it, my dad was so sick at the time when my brother was born that he barely had the energy to make a PB&J, right? So there was a lot of, my dad would help with certain things, right? Mix a bottle or something like that. But a lot of it was me helping take care of the baby a little bit and helping take care of dad
Mhm.
a little bit. But there was also a dad to take care of, right? So there was definitely, in my mind, I still struggle with feeling like I need to help parent my little brother in a way because, again, I go to therapy, and as my therapist mentioned, she's like, that age frame that you were in at that time was the time when little girls would play with Barbies or, American Girl dolls, which don't get me wrong, I did that too. But I also had, there was an alive baby in my house that I was helping taking care of
Mm.
while my dad was going through these traumatic medical, issues. And I think even now, my therapist is like, you definitely still carry a little bit of, I need to take care of Will because I still need to help my parents. And it's like, your dad's okay, right? Like, dad is fine now. So it's
And here you are
okay.
doing all of this work in the community, which of course is another form of caregiving, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. There's a form of caregiving of sharing my story. And, I've always been big into advocacy and awareness with Marfan syndrome. I had appointments last week or earlier this week at Johns Hopkins, and I went to go visit another little Marfan girl that I know. And it's, sitting with her while she gets her IV tube taken out and things like that. So there's always been some sort of caregiver mindset in me.
Hmm.
Um, and I've always carried that with me. And, I think that there's definitely a way to manage that without it, you know, learning how to take care of yourself as well is also very important, right? Learning how to manage those two things. But I mean, even, my passion for social work, I'm in school for social work right now, another form of caregiving. So I've always
Yeah.
had that caregiver in me.
And what do you like at kind of asking for care yourself?
Yeah, again, I'm in therapy and it's taken a long, long time to learn that balance of caring for other people, but also caring for myself. Self-care to me is very, very important. I'm very big on my self-care nights where, I'll put a movie on and I'll take a nice like spa shower, as I call it, and just kind of like relax and do my own thing. Um,
Mm.
I've learned to be very independent over the last couple years. So I really like doing things by myself. I mean, I go to sporting events by myself sometimes. Like, I like doing things by myself
Yeah.
sometimes. And I think, in a way, again, it's kind of like if me and my girlfriends go out, a lot of times I am like the mom of the friend group, right? Another form of caregiving. So it's like sometimes I like going
Mm.
out because it's only me
And
that I.
do you think that becomes a safe place? in a way because it's what you're used to.
It does 100%. And don't get me wrong, I definitely still have fun as a, 21-year-old girl, but there's
Yeah.
definitely still that form of I need to make sure
Yes.
everybody okay around me is okay and, whatever else just to make sure everybody else is okay as well.
Yes. So when I mentioned caring for for you, you went into self-care, and I was thinking, no, I mean external people caring for you, you know.
Oh, even better, even better. So that's actually a really interesting thing that you bring up. So I just had surgery 5 weeks ago on my eye,
Yeah.
and I'm waiting to do my next one in a couple of weeks. And one of the things that I noticed was I really have a hard time with laying in bed all day and having
Can
everybody else do
imagine.
everything
Yeah.
for right? So I'm like, part of this is really, really nice. But then there's a whole other aspect of I'm always the caregiver, right? Like I've always like there's that caregiver side of my brain, right? So in
Mm,
my head, it's like, my friends are coming over and it's a simple act of like, my friends come over, they bring coffee and they sit on my bed with me and braid my hair. Or, my parents are doing pretty much everything for me when they're not at work, right? Feeding me, making sure that I'm taking my medication, helping with all these other things. So I think that definitely messed with me a little bit at the beginning of my eye surgery recovery. And I wasn't a big fan of it. Like the first couple days were okay. And then you get into like week 1 and week 2 post op, and
mm.
it's hard because I want to do it all by myself.
Let's just back up a little bit there perhaps if you feel like it, give people a little bit of context about what happens when you've had that kind of surgery. Why,
Yeah,
you know,
so
because I know that it's about keeping really, really still, isn't it?
it
In
is.
recovery, that's part. There are massive challenges with that. And would you, if you feel comfortable, would you like to tell us what led to you needing that surgery?
Absolutely. So again, with Marfan syndrome, it does not just impact the aorta. For me, it impacts, my aorta a little bit, my blood pressure, and my eyes are a big thing. So about 9 years ago, when I was 12 years old, I had my lenses removed because they had shifted so much in my eye over time that they were practically floating around my eye. So I ended up taking them out and not replacing them immediately because I was still growing so much. And due to my connective tissue being weaker, they just continued to move, and we just didn't want to put them in to reoperate and reoperate and reoperate. Um, and then I met a really, really good surgeon who's very, very familiar with Marfan syndrome, who ended up putting a lens back into my eye. And we did my left eye again 5 weeks ago. And up until then, life without lenses, for anybody wondering, I had very thick glasses. They were bifocals that I had for 9 years, and I could not see without them. They were my eyes, they were my lenses, and I had no peripheral vision. So the only part I could see was right in front of me. So there was no peripheral vision or anything like that, and I could not see without my glasses.
That must
So
have been
again,
very challenging, Grace, especially
it
as a teenager with big, thick glasses.
for sure, it definitely can make you a target for bullying.
Hmm.
As I mentioned earlier, kids are not very nice. And it was definitely hard. I had this surgery when I was in 6th grade, and I had to go through middle school and then high school with these thick glasses that, they're different than what other kids have to deal with. And, it definitely made me feel self-conscious for a long time. My eyes looked very big. My eyes are not that big. They just were magnified by my lenses.
Mm.
And then again, just the thick lens as a whole, it definitely builds some character. But
Yeah.
it definitely impacts you. Looking different, right, is hard. Self-conscious and self-esteem issues and all these different things that I had to kind of deal with while I'm a teenage girl. Um,
And absolutely, and we know, sort of generically, that people being bullied at school can have really long-term effects and cause obviously depression and worse. Um, it, I don't know you, but it sounds like to me, what I'm picking up is it's actually made you quite resilient.
I think it has. I think it has. I think, when I was younger, I was definitely self-conscious about it. It wasn't something that I was willing to talk about and be as open with. But, I think over time, as you grow and you get older and whatever else, it just, you learn how to deal with it, right? I mean, in my life at the time, there was no other option. It was either I don't
Mm.
wear the glasses and I can't see at all, or I wear the glasses and I can see. So you got
What
to
about
kind of,
were there moments where you felt angry and frustrated and would sort of lash out? I could understand somebody wanting to lash out at their father and go, this is all because of you or something, and that, you could imagine that could be in play in a family.
yeah. So it's really interesting. I've talked to my parents a couple times about this, and I've always asked, like, you know, I'm one of three kids. I'm the oldest. And I've asked my dad, like, have you ever had guilt? Right? Like in my head, as I get older, and I'm sure we'll dive into it a little bit later, but you know, knowing that you have this condition and that you could pass it on to your child, I mean, in my mind, that feels like that could be heavy. And luckily, I don't think I ever um, felt angry at my dad for giving me Marfan syndrome. I mean, it happens. There have been times where, again, I've been doing this advocacy and awareness thing for a long time now, since I was about 12 or 13 years old.
Mm.
And I do a lot of awareness online and things of that nature. So on my dad's aortiversaries, the day that he dissected, I'll do a post for him and, grateful that he's still here and that kind of thing. And the amount of times that I've had to delete comments off of posts from people who are sitting behind a screen commenting things like, oh, I would never have a child if I knew I had Marfan's, knowing that I could pass it on. That's so selfish, right? And it's like, again, I think in a way I've always been big on, I don't want Marfan syndrome to guide my life, right? It's a part of me, but I don't want it to be all of me.
Mm.
And I think I've always loved kids. I think maybe one day down the road I would want to be a mom, but there's that understanding that I could pass Marfan syndrome on. So I think just being aware of that is very important, but also not feeling angry for passing it on or getting it, because again, it's science.
There he is. I
Is
think we
that
lost him for a second. And while we're in a quick pause, let's say hi to Molly and Christina and Rob. Molly
Hi,
says,
Molly.
hi,
Hi, Christina. Hi,
Grace. I
Rob.
just saw your video of you talking about Marfans. You were quite a bit younger, and to see you now, wow, good job with all your advocacy.
Thank you.
Back to you,
That's good.
John.
Yes, sorry about that. Um,
All good.
um, so you were in full flow there. Sorry.
You're all good. I can repeat myself if needed.
So, would you like to sort of bring us up to date? You had the lenses removed, and now, as I understand it, more recently, you had the next stage of that to give you more independent vision. Yes.
Yes. So I had my surgery again about 5 weeks ago, and the recovery is about a month long. I would say that the hardest part of the recovery is the first, I want to say, 2 weeks, give or take. Um, and I'll kind of dive into that, what that looks like recovery wise. But I wake up right out of surgery and I have a patch on my eye, and that stays on for about 24 hours until the surgeon takes it off. And then I have to sleep with a shield on my eye, which is basically a patch, for the first week after surgery. Um, Anytime I sleep, just to make sure I don't rub my eye or anything of that nature.
Mm.
Um, a big part of this whole independence thing while recovering, or lack thereof, is I was unable to bend over for 2 weeks. So if I needed to pick anything up, got to wait for somebody to help me with that. I wasn't able to get dirty water in my eye for about 3 weeks. So I ended up, I'm very, very lucky with the support system that I have. And one of my best friends came over and simply washed my hair for me. And it was just kind of one of those things that, I wanted to do on my own, but again, I have a great support system that's like, I'll come over and I'll help you wash your hair. Right.
Yeah.
So it definitely is a little bit rough, and it's a lot of laying around and not doing much, because then you have a lot of light sensitivity as well. So even walking past a window hurts your eye. So it was definitely rough for about, 2 weeks, give or take. And then I went to the Marfan conference in Atlanta where a lot of the community comes together. And I was still pretty tired, and
Hmm.
just kind of worn out from surgery. And then you add in traveling as well. And one of the things I love about being there is everybody gets it. So there were times where I was like, I am so tired, or my eye is really hurting. And I would go up to my hotel room and nobody asks a question because everybody there
Sure.
understands what you're going through.
That's one of the most important things about those kind of communities, and I think this community, isn't it? It's like, yeah, by definition, it means we can kind of relax because then we don't feel, so exceptional, or it takes away that need to be continually explaining. Especially if people don't, if you look okay on the exterior and
Yep.
go out into the real world,
The
and then
real
you have
world.
to, this is, oh, well, this, and this, and that's very tiring, isn't it?
It is. And I think, again, like I think that having a support system is just so, so, so crucial when it comes to things like this. And having a village and having, a team and a support system to back you up. A lot of my friends are very, very familiar with Marfan syndrome. So a lot of my friends who I go out with a lot or hang out with a lot, they kind of can pick up on, all right, Grace, you're starting to get tired, aren't you? Or like, we can sit down for
Mm,
a little bit, like it's okay. So a lot of my friends understand and they ask questions, and things of that nature. But I got very, very lucky with the friends that I have, and how understanding they are. And asking questions is so important. I'm an open book, right? I think a big part of this awareness thing and advocacy is being open and sharing your stories, as you're comfortable. And
mm,
I think that leads into so many other things, but just having a good support system who understands and is willing to help you and learn more and stand by your side during, recoveries. Again, I had friends come over and what are you going to do? Right? Like everyone's like, oh, I'm home for the summer. What are we doing? And I was like, laying in my bed. um,
yeah. That must
but
have been very challenging. Just the sheer thing of needing to be really, really still for so long.
For sure. And I
Not
think,
easy.
again, like my support system, it was, I had friends who came over and we would lay in my bed and watch movies, or, come over and braid my
Mm,
hair, come over and do just basic little things. I had a friend of mine come over who was like, I have homework to do, but I want to hang out with you. So she came over and she sat in my room and did her homework while we watched a movie. So it's just like
okay.
those little things, and having those great friends that do things like that for you is
For
just
sure.
life.
Yeah. So a few weeks later, do you want to update us on how you're doing with that? And I
Yeah.
understand you're going to have surgery in the other eye as well.
Yeah, I'm doing wonderful. I really don't have much pain anymore. A little bit discomfort here and there, but nothing crazy. Um, I actually had a laser procedure done 2 days ago,
Hmm.
because we were a little bit, there was a slight complication just due to my weak connective tissue. Um, and we were a little bit nervous that we would have to go in and do surgery yesterday. But I ended up going in on Tuesday and they did a quick laser procedure to fix the issue. So that was, um, a little bit unexpected, but overall
Mm.
fix the issue, we think. So I'll be going back on Monday to see my surgeon again just to make sure everything is looking good. Um, but yeah, I'm doing great now. I'm actually going to a concert later tonight. And I have plans next week. So I'm doing great now. So I have about 6 weeks before my next surgery.
And are you already noticing changes and improvements in
Oh
your
yeah,
vision?
it's very funny. It's actually because they've only done one eye right now. I can see out of my left eye, which is the one that was operated on. Pretty much perfect vision out of that eye already. And then my right eye, I am still legally blind, because I'm not wearing my bifocals because they mess up this eye. So
Mm.
um, I'm blind over here, but I can see over here. So it's a little bit funky right now.
And would that sort of rule out things like driving and at the moment?
Yeah, yeah, my surgeon's like, "You could probably maybe do it." And I was like, I'm not gonna test it because
Yeah.
again, I can't see over here." So I'm like,
Yeah. Is it
um,
really worth the risk? And there's going to be a
yeah,
lot of head turning, isn't there?
exactly. But no, it's incredible. Since I was 4 years old, I've had to rely on glasses really. So it's a whole new world being able to wake up and see. And I always did everything with my glasses on. I would swim with my glasses, shower with my glasses, do everything with my glasses on. And now I can do my makeup without my glasses on. And it's a whole new world. So I'm getting used to it all.
And then when the other eye's restored, that's got to be a party and a celebration, hasn't it?
Oh yes, I'm so excited because again, it's already a whole new world, and I'm only halfway there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. How
Yeah,
exciting, and nice for us to have a a really optimistic story like that as well.
for sure.
You sound like you're doing so well.
I am. I am. I'm very pleased with the outcome and how well I recovered.
So moving forward, then, here you are at 21. You said at the top of the show that this is a kind of for life condition. How does it feel about your plans for the future, and what that might feel like, and as you move into social work and things like that, and
Yeah, so I think especially being a daughter who has seen, a lot of scary Marfan syndrome issues through my dad, I think that there's definitely been times where, my brain goes to worst case scenario. I deal with chronic pain. I have costochondritis, which the proper term is an inflammation of the cartilage in your rib cage.
right.
Basically, summarizing that, it basically means that I have chronic pain in my back, ribs, and chest. So if I take a really deep breath, I can feel everything. Just it basically feels like everything. Imagine somebody taking like a wet rag and just wringing it out. Basically, what my body
Mm,
feels like when I take a deep breath. Um, and different things like that. So I think a lot of times I'm hyper aware of what's going on with my body, and there's
mm,
definitely a little bit of fear of when I was younger. Doctors tell you as you get older the risk of dissection increases, or like all these issues could get worse, and it's like, oh, maybe later down the road in your life you'll need open heart surgery, and it's like, all right, so when's that coming? Right. So it's always been there
yeah.
used to, for a long time, for a couple years, I would say, there was this like cloud that would hang over my head of like, when's the time? When's the time I dissect? When's the time I have an aneurysm? And um again, I'm in therapy, and I work through a lot of that, and I don't want to go through life being scared that something is going to happen at any moment. um, I think that it's normal to have those thoughts. Again,
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
saw all of this as a kid, and I understand it more now as a 21-year-old. So it's being aware, but not letting it weigh you down, I think is, there's a way to balance that.
Mm,
But I think, looking at the future, it's, for me, there's nothing I can do. Right. And a lot of people in the aortic dissection and aortic issue community can probably understand this, is there's a lot of times it just happens, right? These things just happen, and there's no way to necessarily stop these things. So in my mind, I kind of put it in a different aspect of, it's out of my control, right?
hmm
So I want to live my life to the fullest. I want to do all the normal 21-year-old things, but I do have this other issue that I have to worry about, or this other, you know, thing that could happen that my other friends don't have to deal with as much, right? I mean,
yeah.
my other friends don't wake up some days and be like, "Is today the day?" Right?
Does
Um,
that thought
I-
sometimes play out? You might wake up on a particular morning, that thought is just going,
yeah,
hello.
sometimes it does, and it's luckily it's not a lot, but there are definitely some days where I definitely have some PTSD from seeing my dad stuff. So there's definitely those moments I wake up and, I'm like, is today the day? Or, just kind of being aware. And I'm always like, just, when I have those thoughts, but it could also not be the day. Right. And I
Mm,
think, a big thing that I tell people is, when people ask about Marfan syndrome, they're like, what is it? And I do my best to describe it to people, and not make them go straight to the internet. Because if you look up Marfan syndrome on the internet, the first thing it tells you is Marfan syndrome is a life-threatening medical condition that affects the body's connective tissue. When you see that word in big print, life-threatening, it's
yeah.
going to throw you off a little bit, right? And in my mind, there are a lot of things in life that could be life-threatening, right?
Mm,
Marfan syndrome might not be what takes me out, right? So it's kind of understanding those different aspects of life, of not waking up and just fearing for the worst. And again, it's normal too, but it's learning how to balance those thoughts.
Yes, and here I've talked extensively about about anticipatory anxiety. So much of anxiety is anticipatory; it hasn't happened that yet. And also the importance, if we have this condition, from what you've been saying, worrying about might today be the day. Well, I better make the most of the day then.
Exactly.
Is a way of reframing that, isn't it?
Exactly.
Bringing
And I
ourselves
think,
back to the moment. None of us
yeah,
actually know, life has so many twists and turns. None
it
of us
does.
actually know how long we're going to be here for. So let's get on with it now.
Exactly. And that applies to people who have Marfan syndrome, people who don't have Marfan syndrome, people who have survived a dissection. I mean, everybody, it's the same kind of thing. And I think you talk about the underlying fears of different issues, right? And I think that's a big part of all this is, learning how to manage those fears, right? And one of the big things that I struggle with, even still, and I'm again working on this on my own, is when my dad gets sick, right? I mean, I
Okay.
briefly mentioned my dad has Marfan's and he's had all these other, he's a 2-time dissection survivor. He's had endocarditis. He's had some scary things that I saw as a kid. Um, and so in my mind, when my dad gets sick, even a simple, cough or, a simple cold or the flu, right? My brain goes to worst case scenario, right? Like my
Mm,
brain goes to dad doesn't just get sick, right? Dad gets really, really, really sick.
yeah.
So I think again, it's one of those things that like I work on with my dad, like, with seeing what my dad went through as a kid, it was like, just because dad was really, really, really sick this time, dad might just have a cold this time, right?
Hmm.
And, a lot of times it's, my dad leaves work and I'm okay, he has, an hour and a half at most it'll take him to get home. And then it's, oh my gosh, it's been 5 minutes past that. Is he okay? Right. So I think, it definitely, there's a way to manage all that, stress and the worry. But it definitely, I think that definitely impacts my life as well. Just kind of seeing that side of things and learning how to push through those as well.
And another way of reframing that is, yes, your dad's got sick and many things have happened to him. I haven't actually met him, but the other side of that is it shows how resilient he is, how much of a fighter he is.
For sure. And I talk about that all the time of, my dad, as my dad puts it, he should not be here. There's no scientific reason why my dad should still be alive. Um, just because of everything his body has dealt with over the years. And as he puts it, he has 3 reasons for being here, and that's a Grace, Will, and Delaney, me and my 2 siblings. So my dad is very resilient, and I think, seeing him fight through things has showed me how to fight through things as well, right? And given me a different perspective on things. And my dad's big on, well, what are you going to do, right? Like my dad's fine, he's at work right now. I think he's watching this, but he's at work right now, right? Like he's
Hi, Dad, if you're there.
hi dad, like he's at work right now, right? He
I
works
was
for a
expecting that he
company.
might come in the door and tell you to tidy your room, Grace.
But like he has a very, very normal life. And I think that's one of the things that I've, looked at in my life is I have Marfan syndrome. I have this rare condition. I have chronic pain that I live with. I have all these different issues, but I also have a very normal life, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm 21 years old. I go out with my girlfriends. I go to concerts. I travel, I do all the normal things.
good for you. And a little thought that occurs to me. When you, though, come across people who are like really complaining because they do have a cold or, go on about, they're an ache and pain and it seems really insignificant, and they're maybe using it as a way to gain attention and so forth. Um, do you, I shouldn't lead the witness here, but tell me how you are with that. I think you probably
um,
guessed what I might be about to think and say.
yeah. I think that there's definitely, there's a side of me that, look, nobody likes having a cold, right? I'm miserable when I have a cold too, right? I get it, right? I have seasonal allergies, they're terrible. I feel awful, right? Um, but I think, in my mind, I try to give everybody a little bit of grace, no pun intended. But there's, you know, maybe their cold is worse than I think it is. I don't know, right? I mean, you never know their story, and that's, I think especially being in the Marfan community, I think a big thing to understand with Marfan syndrome is everybody is different as well. So for me, when I go through like, I just had this eye surgery, and it was, without going into details because it gets gross, it was a pretty invasive eye surgery.
Sure.
Um, but, you know, looking at what my dad has gone through with these open heart surgeries and endocarditis and dissections and all these things, I'm like, this is nothing. Like this is nothing. This
Mm,
is 2 weeks of laying low. Like I'm gonna go back to work and I'm gonna be complaining that I have to be back at work, right? So it's
mm.
like for
I
some people,
suppose the only danger with that, though, is sometimes, that you one can take that to the other extreme, and you play down your own issues too much,
yep,
and as though, oh, I haven't got any right to complain because it is much worse for my dad or something like. You do have a right to complain, of course you do. You have
yes.
your life.
Very true. And that's, especially I was talking to one of my friends who has Marfan's, and she's, a little bit, her case is a little bit more extreme than mine is, with Marfan's. And, I was talking to her about it, and I was like, I can't complain to you about this. Like, I can't complain to you about this. And she was like, yeah, you can. She's like, I don't want to go through eye surgery. She's like, that sounds horrid. Right. And
Mm,
so I think it's, everybody has a different story, and, has a different thing that they're dealing with. And that's anybody in life, right? I think,
mm,
you know, being a younger kid, and I'm very open about this as well. I do have anxiety, a little bit of depression, and PTSD as well. But it's, everybody is fighting something, right? And like, for me as a kid, it was, well, my other friends get to continue doing cheer, and I have to back out, or, I'm upset about this. Reminding yourself that everybody's going through something, right?
hmm
I'm very smiley. And that was another thing with eye surgery recovery, is like when you smile, everything moves. So it
Oh,
hurt to smile. So that was really unfortunate. But
so and then nobody should make you laugh at the moment either.
no,
No way, no,
no.
no
I
jokes.
have a friend who does comedy, like stand-up comedy, and he was coming over and making jokes. And I was like, please stop, because this hurts. um, but I've always been very smiley and things like that. And I think, even as a kid, I was the same way. But it's, here's this smiley little kid who's wearing hot pink and sparkles and a little tiara, right? Little do you know that I'm not going home. I'm going home with, my friends to go to their house because my dad's in the ICU dealing with open heart surgeries,
Hmm
right? So, that's a big thing that, I try to remind myself a little bit every day, and remind my little siblings of, you never know what people are going through. Again, for me, you wouldn't look at me and be like, oh, she's sick, right? Or she has a chronic illness, right? I mean, walking down the street, you just see, oh, she's tall. Like that's about it.
Yeah.
When I had my bifocals, it was, oh, she has big glasses or whatever, or big eyes or whatever. But it was like, you know, you, I don't look sick, right? So to
Mm.
anybody else, if I have a big smile on my face, you would have no idea that as a little kid, I was dealing with these other things. So I think, um, it's also always helped me to just remind myself that, I might be going through these hard things, but, there's other people who are too. So it's, there were times where I felt alone, right? And I felt like, oh, there's no other little girl who understands this, right? Like everyone else is just going home and having these family dinners, and I'm going home and I'm having family dinners, but it's with bonus family. It's not with my parents, right? Because my parents are at the hospital, right? Or other kids aren't going home. And a big thing for me that I saw, and a big part of this caregiving thing, even as a little kid, was, my dad had a home nurse after one of his really, really big surgeries. I believe it was the one after the internal bleeding, and he had a hole in his stomach, basically. And the home nurse would come over and clean it up, and it was pretty, I mean, graphic, right? Especially for a little girl to see. And I would sit there and I would hold my dad's hand because I didn't want him to feel like he was alone, right? And I wanted him to feel like he had somebody there for him. But it was like, I don't think other 7-year-olds are sitting with their dad and his home nurse while he gets stuffed, right? So it's
Absolutely no.
learning how to
Um,
kind of deal with all that.
I mean, you sound an absolute hero there. Um,
I try. He's
And
my
you
hero, so I try to
and
be
you
his.
sound like a lovely daughter, and you and yet I can also see that's a lot of weight for you to carry around. Those memories, those traumas,
For sure.
they are with us. They are part of our. Each of us have a. You say everyone's dealing with something. Well, each of us has a life story, don't they? And this is
Exactly.
part of yours, and unfortunately, there's no escaping it. I'm sure, your dad wouldn't have wanted that to have happen, but that is what happens in life sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very, very thankful for the support system I have. And it's, good to
Mm,
have those people that you can lean on, right? And those people that you can be open and honest and be like, yo, I'm having a rough day with this, right? Like,
mm,
I see something and it reminds me of when my dad was sick, or again, my dad gets sick and I freak out thinking that he needs to go to the hospital. He might just have a cold. So it's
yeah.
having a support system you can lean on in that aspect. And, especially as a little kid, again, I would go to a lot of family friends' houses, and, you stay with them and you make more family, but it's still that, as I tell people, as a little kid, a lot of you, you're in elementary, middle school, you want to go and have sleepovers with your friends every night, right? Having a sleepover on a school night is like a treat, right? Like you're a lucky kid if you get that. Well, when I was a kid, I was getting that a lot. And there were times where I was like, I just want to go home to my home. I want to go home to my parents, right? I want to go
Mm.
home and have a family dinner at my house, right? I don't
Of
want
course
to,
you did. Yeah.
right? I don't want to like
Mm,
bear in. I think in a way as a kid, I felt kind of like a burden on some of these families. Like, I'm not your child,
mhm.
right? Like, why are you taking care of me like this? Like, you don't have to do this. But there they were. So,
And of course that trauma in itself can be another reason for a person then growing up and finding it difficult to accept being cared for.
yep,
It
for
could
sure.
build
And I
that.
think,
It could build almost like too much independence.
yeah, and I think, the too much independence and also attachments with people, right? And that's another big thing I work on in therapy is like, why do I have such weird attachments with people, right? Like, I feel like I get really, really, really attached to people really quick. And my therapist is like, well, that's because when you were a kid, right? Like, your brain is figuring out how to be in relationships, whether it be, I mean, not as a kid, but, romantic relationships, friendships, really any kind of relationship. It's, I connect really closely with people. And if I don't, I think that there's something wrong. And it's like, it's not good. And it's like, sometimes you're not going to connect with every single person that you meet,
Mm,
right? But
absolutely. In
kind of
life, we
having
all
that,
have to learn that. Yeah.
exactly. And it's, kind of understanding that, you're going to connect well with some people and you're not going to connect well with other people. And that's
Mm,
okay. But I think, those attachments, my therapist has always been like, well, when you were a little kid, you relied on these friendships, you relied on people, right? Like, because your parents would be at the hospital and what were you going to do? You were 7 and 8 years old. Like you can't just
mm,
stay at the house by yourself for a week, right? Um,
yeah.
so it was relying on these people in my life. So it was definitely, something that I didn't realize actually impacted my life as much as it did until, or still does until like a year, 2 years ago, kind of thing.
So has that also led to a tendency where you want to make everybody better?
Oh yes. Oh
Tell us
yes.
about a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I think that, I always try to help other people and make things as easy for them as possible. If, if it pushes me back or it puts me in a weird position, as long as they're okay, it's okay. Because I was able to help them. Right. So I think that's always been a big thing. And it's, learning how to, you get on an airplane and they tell you where the gas mask is or whatever it is, right? And if you need to jump, or like the life vest, right? You put yours on first,
Yeah.
and then you help the person next to her, and then you help your child, right? And I think that's a big thing with anything in mental health as well, right? Any person who, might be a people pleaser, or, somebody who has a story like mine where it's, caring for people around you, it's, you still have to care for yourself. And it's
Mm,
a big thing of, especially in relationships, I've learned over my, teenage years and now my early 20s is, um, you can't, I have a big theory that you can't expect somebody to love you, and you can't expect to love somebody fully if you can't love yourself. It's like pouring from an empty cup. It doesn't work.
hmm.
And so I
Well, it's a
think
pretty
that
important. That's a pretty base life rule that I'd certainly work with
for sure.
in
And
work,
it's,
yes.
you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think, especially you as a therapist and me going into social work, it's still that same kind of thing, right?
Mm,
You have to make sure that you're caring for yourself, right?
yes.
And, self-care is very important, especially in,
Mm,
again, what you do for work and what I want to do for work. Um, is you have to be able to care for yourself as well as caring for other people, but you got to put yourself as a priority. And I think that was really hard for me to do as a kid. But I've
so I
learned
would
over
call that positive selfishness. And what you were also describing, the risk with that when you're taking care of everybody else and trying to make sure everybody else is fine, is that you don't foreground yourself enough in this
burnout.
situation.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think burnout's a big thing with all that too, right? I mean, especially with the medical stuff, it's like, okay, like I might be feeling okay, but is dad feeling okay? Right? I
Mm,
think, another way of looking at it, I got COVID about a year ago, and it was rough for like a week. Um, and my biggest thing was, Dad, I want you to stay. My dad was trying to care for me too, and it's like he would bring food into my room and leave it on my desk, and then he would leave the room, and I would get out of my bed and go to the plate on my desk and bring it back to my bed, that kind of thing. And it was I needed to make sure I didn't get my dad sick, right? I
hmm.
mean, I didn't feel great, but like my biggest concern was my dad and getting my dad sick, because again, I don't know how his body is going to react to COVID,
Yes.
right? So again, it's kind of one of
Mm,
those things of like, I was the sick one. My dad was fine, right? Um,
mm,
but it's still like feeling the need to take care of everybody else around you.
yes. So I mean, these things don't go away overnight, do they? We can see how they've been formed.
For
That's
sure.
almost sort of wrapped in with the PTSD and and the trauma. Yes. Um, but what's great is you've got a lot of developed awareness about that. You can see your behaviors, and so of course then you can begin to adjust them. If people don't see their behaviors, they keep on making, no, I don't want to call them mistakes, but the issues keep on reoccurring, don't they, in
Well, the
relationships
definition of
and
insanity is doing the same thing and expecting the same results,
yes,
right? It's not going to
yeah,
work. But no,
yeah,
that's one of those things of, um, I mentioned earlier the attachment I have to my dad and the need to make sure that he's okay, right? It's going to take my dad at most an hour and a half to get home from work. If 5, 10 minutes later he's not home, I'm freaking out.
mm-hmm,
My therapist has told me, because we're working on this right now, of like, just because dad might be a couple minutes late, maybe he's just running into the grocery store to grab something, right? Maybe traffic is a little bit worse than he thought, right? So, but learning how to kind of like relax and be like, he's fine, right? Dad's fine,
yes,
right? And learning, my therapist is always like, you don't need to text your dad 5 minutes after the hour and a half if it takes him that long,
absolutely.
right?
And
Learn to like
phones
step
can be
back.
terrible for that, of course.
Yeah,
Once upon a time you wouldn't have really known, you would have waited.
exactly.
But
And
what we're
it's,
trying to do in those situations is we're trying to maintain safety, aren't we? Because at
yep,
the base of everything and all of our behaviors is fear. That's what's driving that. The fear is completely under. And so what you're doing is trying to make things safe, because then once it's safe,
exactly.
you can go on.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that, when my dad dissected the second time, my dad again has had two aortic dissections, survived both of them. The first was a type B, the second was a type A. And I was out of town when he had the second one. And I remember my mom had called my friend's mom that I was with, and my friend's mom brought me into the room and they sat me down and they told me what was going on. And my first reaction was, okay, I'll come home. And my mom said to me, I'll never forget this, and it still sticks with me for certain situations of, there is nothing that you can do here at home that you cannot do at the hospital or at the beach. So I was at the beach. I
Mm,
was 2 states away, right?
yeah.
There was nothing I could do at the beach, and there was nothing I could do at home, right?
Mm,
Everything was out of my control. So my mom said to me, she's like, stay at the beach, enjoy the vacation, come home, and we'll all be together. Because again, it was out of my control, right? So it's learning
mm.
how to, and I don't like when things are out of my control either. So,
I
you
can
add in
imagine
that
in
one
that
layer.
situation, though, that could be, it could be very hard to manage, can't it?
Oh,
Because
yes, it
you know
was.
there could be guilt with that. You know, I need to get home. I need to help.
Exactly.
And how can I get on
Exactly.
with? Does it feel super selfish if I get on with my life by going to the beach while my dad's so ill?
Exactly. And it was, my thoughts were my dad's in the hospital. I want to be with him. Or, what if my mom has something to do or whatever else the case might be? What about my siblings? Like I need to be there for my siblings, right? Because they were very young at the time as well. And again, I still have in my brain, I'm still a caregiver for my siblings, right? And I still want to
Mm.
be there for them. So it was like, well, I'll be fine, but I want to make sure that the kids are okay. Right. Or I want to make sure my mom is okay and she's handling this okay. And I want to make sure my dad's okay and that he's going to make it. And it's like, again, there's nothing that you can do in that situation. And that's very,
Yeah,
very challenging to sit in.
yeah. But also very tiring to have all of those kind of thoughts going around in your head. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to care for that person.
For sure.
Yeah. I just come in there and bring Joshua back in and say hi to everybody who might be out there listening, and if there are any comments and questions. Joshua?
Well, we're going to jump right into Bill saying, I'm here. She's being good and not reading the text I'm sending her phone.
Oh,
Hi, Bill.
Molly says, Grace, I'm sure you're a very important and impactful figure within the Marfan community, especially for the younger ones. And your dad says, she's a pretty amazing kid, pretty awesome kid. I'm lucky to have her around. Molly says, you're definitely your dad's daughter. You both are incredibly strong. Molly says, hi, Bill. If I could, what? I can see you beaming from here. Sorry. That's an
oh,
exclamation point. It threw me off. Bruce joined the chat. Mr. Barnhart, you must be very proud. Grace is wise beyond her years. She is. It's very true. Molly, yay! You actually listened to the airplane safety demo. A way to go.
Yes, more than I do. Yeah, heard it too many times. Yeah, that's great. So,
Back to you.
thank you. So as we sort of draw to a close, well, it's been wonderful to have you on with us. I'm sure everybody is moved by your attitude, your charisma, you know, how mature you are with all of this, and how you manage your way through it. We all, I'm sure, want to give you a big hug and kind of say to you as well, you make sure you look after yourself, girl. You know, put your own
for
needs
sure.
first as well. You know, that makes us all stronger, as you've already alluded to take care of everybody else.
It does.
The stronger we are in ourselves, the more we can help others from a firm base, aren't we?
For sure. Absolutely. Can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah. And is there anything that you've learned today, or that you'd like to take away with you, or?
Yeah, I think if I could tell everybody else something, I think that I'm very big on everybody has their story. I have my story, and one of the things I try to remind myself is you can make it your excuse or you can make it your story. And I have like learned to make Marfan syndrome, both from the patient aspect and caregiver aspect, to make it my story and not an excuse. I use it to empower myself and to empower the community, to spread awareness, because awareness saves lives overall. And just kind of understand that it is a medical condition, but it does also impact your mental health. And that was actually I'm 21 now. It took me until I was about 19 years old to realize that Marfan syndrome does have an emotional impact on my life. And
To
that's the
accept
crazy
that,
thing.
perhaps, to
Yeah,
let that in.
yeah, and that's the crazy thing with trauma is, in my mind, my therapist had mentioned to me, she's like, well, these things, you have these relationships or you do these things because of the trauma from, when your dad was so sick and whatnot. And I was like, but that wasn't trauma. That was just how life was. And she was like, it's still trauma. Like
Yeah.
just because it happened doesn't mean it's normal. And I was like, well, nobody's story is normal. Everybody has something. And there, it is okay to sit in it and to have to work through it, and to acknowledge that it's your story, and it's learning how to manage it and go through life while having these issues, right? I think You know, my dad, his whole aorta is redone pretty much. And he still goes through life like nothing happened. You know, you would have no idea unless he took his shirt off and you saw the scars. So I think that's a big part of life, is just doing what you can to live life to the fullest.
I think the key point you make there is often what happens with trauma and anxiety is we get so used to it over a number of years, or we've grown up with it since childhood. It's who we think we are. You know, it becomes absolutely kind of systemic to our character, and it can take a long time for us to realize that no, actually, that this causes that and that causes that, and it's because of the trauma. It's not. I'm not only my trauma.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's a big thing to learn, especially as I get older, right? Is you know, one of the things that I think is an interesting perspective on my side is like, you know, dating, right? And kind of figuring that whole aspect out. People are like, do you mention Marfan syndrome on first dates? Or like, you know,
Oh,
how
look
does
at
that
you though, bringing that in right at the end.
I know, right? But it's like it's kind of like the quick, like, look, it's a big part of my life because I do all these things, right? Because I speak on these shows, or because I've done podcasts, or I've spoken at the US Capitol and all these different things. So it's a big part of my life, but it's not, Marfan syndrome isn't my life, right? It's a part of me, it's not all of me. So I think that's a big part of understanding these stories. And you know, the sort of being an aortic hopes or aortic dissection survivor, or whatever else the case might be, is, you know, you have this story, but it doesn't have to
Yeah,
be
absolutely.
you.
That's been very important for me. That almost a drive. Well, more it is a driver for me that I want to be involved in many other things beside. I have many other interests, and I think
Exactly.
that gives me balance. I don't want to be defining myself all the time by my aortic dissection.
Exactly. And I think that's a big
Not
thing,
always
right?
easy though.
No.
On the difficult days when we have no energy, and the hardest thing about pain is, you know, it can just take over. You know, it's very hard to ignore,
For sure.
as you know,
For
well
sure.
know. Well, I'm sure with your ribs. Yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
it becomes the
No, for
dominant.
sure.
It dominates everything in the day, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's interesting when I do, you know, I do occasional, like, you know, presentations on my own or whatever else the case might be of my story or Marfan syndrome. And I usually start with, hi, my name is Grace. I'm, you know, 21 years old. I live in Fairfax, or I live in Virginia, right outside DC. You know, I want to be a social worker. I want to work with the military. I'm a big sister. I love ice hockey. I love country music. Oh, and I have Marfan syndrome. So it's always, there's always more to me. And then I have this thing.
Yes. Well, that's a good balance. I'm sure you'll make a wonderful social worker.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sure any health system would want to kidnap you and bring you over. So, but you're a credit to the whole community. Absolutely. So
Thank you.
thank you so much, Grace, for joining us today. It's been lovely.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
You're most welcome. So bye everybody.
Bye,
See you
everybody.
next time.
Okay, I'll do it. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Oh yes,
Christina
please
says,
like and
thank you for
subscribe. I always forget
sharing.
that. I get told off. Yeah, and share.
And Velda has joined the chat. We will see you guys next week. Wave.
Okay.
Wave. Okay, I'm setting it
Bye
up.
bye. Bye.